Welcome to the Indeed podcast, part of the Indeed Knowledge series. I'm your host, Kai Bren Jacobson. Indeed podcasts have been made possible due to the generous support of the European Commission. In this episode in the Knowledge series, I interview Aileen Van Leewen. Van Leewen is a monitoring and evaluation officer at the International Center for Counter-Terrorism. In our discussion together, she introduces the fundamentals of monitoring and evaluation within the counter-terrorism and preventing and countering violent extremism fields. She highlights the importance of building a culture of evaluation to gain insights, demonstrate effectiveness, ensure accountability, and empower stakeholders. Addressing common challenges and misconceptions, such as the difficulty of measuring non-events and the perceived sensitivity of evaluations, Aileen Van Leewen advocates for evidence-based practices to enhance our organizational capacity and transparency. The establishment of the International Center for Counterterrorism's Monitoring and Evaluation Center of Excellence aims to revolutionize evaluation practices, promote multi-stakeholder collaboration, and integrate monitoring and evaluation into all initiatives, fostering sustainable and effective counterterrorism efforts. I invite you to visit the website of the ICCT Monitoring and Evaluation Center of Excellence at icct.nl/monitoring-and-evaluation, where you will find information on the full range of services and how you can contact the center for support, as well as the website of the Indeed Project on evidence-based evaluation at indeedproject.eu. There, on the Indeed Project website, you can find an incredible breadth of resources for policymakers, evaluators, and practitioners in the field, including the online Indeed evidence-based evaluation tool, which can be used to guide and support you step by step through developing and implementing evidence-based evaluation of your projects, policies, and initiatives. You will also find e-guidebooks on evidence-based evaluation, the Indeed repositories on risk and protective factors and on evidence-based initiatives, 2 online courses on evidence-based evaluation and designing with evidence, and video interviews, podcasts, webinars, and much more. The Indeed website is a resource tool for practitioners, experts, and policymakers in the field and is available in 10 languages. Please visit the Indeed website to discover the range of materials available there and share it further with colleagues in the field. But for now, I would like to welcome you once again and to invite you to enjoy our discussion with Aileen Van Leewen of the ICCT M&E Center of Excellence on an introduction to monitoring and evaluation in the counter-terrorism and preventing and countering violent extremism fields, what it is, why it matters, and how to start. Aileen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for the invite.
So, Aileen, can you share with us a little bit, what is it that you do at ICCT, and in particular, the work that you're doing on monitoring and evaluation?
Yes. So ICCT is an international think and do tank focused specifically on addressing issues around counterterrorism and preventing and countering violent extremism. We have a lot of different research programs and pillars focusing on specific aspects of these topics, and I focus specifically on the evaluation aspect. And within that, we're developing and establishing an M&E Center of Excellence for this field specifically. And that focuses on training, research on this topic, but also events and conducting external evaluations and providing support for organizations.
So I'm going to want to ask you more about the M&E Center of Excellence, but maybe before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit, how did you get into the field of working on monitoring and evaluation? What is it that has attracted you to this field?
Yeah, it's not been a straight journey, I would say. So it's not that I was studying and thought I should do M&E for the rest of my life. But how it worked, I have a background in conflict studies and human rights and social science as well. And first I worked on conflict mediation and on peace building, where I got to, basically there I got familiar with M&E because it's a much more well-known practice in that field. And from there, I transitioned to doing research on PCVE, specifically in the Netherlands, and then also providing policy advice And from that policy advice, we also started engaging in evaluations. And that's how I got to understand the importance of evaluation and how interesting it is, especially also from a research perspective, but also from a mediation and facilitation perspective. So it brought a lot of components together for me. And then ICCT opened a full M&E position on this topic, in addition to research capacity on this field and how to advance evaluation. So that's how I got to where I am now.
That sounds like a great position for you.
Yeah, I really enjoy it.
So ICCT is one of the leading think and do tanks in the field, and now you're pioneering the creation of this Center for Monitoring and Evaluation in our field. What is your vision? What is your goals for this center? What do you hope to achieve or contribute to the field with it?
So what we noticed, and there has been a lot of research done on this, but evaluations are still quite scarce in this field particularly. And also, if evaluations are done, the quality is sometimes lacking. So that's been an observation made in this field before I joined. That's not new, but what we then figured is that it's really important to have something that lasts. So a lot of projects, they have a short period, they're engaged for a few years or maybe even shorter, or if you do a project and you have only one evaluation, that doesn't add up for really building the capacity of the field and really integrating this practice in all types of initiatives. So the M&E Center of Excellence is really focused on solidifying this practice of integrating M&E into all types of initiatives in this field. And not only conducting M&E, because sometimes it's seen as a tick box, right? Like, oh, you need to do M&E just for looking good, or because it's important, because other people say so. But what then we want to do is also take it a step further. Like, how can you use that evaluation for evidence-based practice and for further evidence-based policy making and decision making, that it actually has an impact? Because you don't only want to know the impact of a current initiative or program, but you also want to know maybe the impact of all the programs that are happening in that region. Like, are they maybe interacting? How can they reinforce each other? But also, how are they maybe counterproductive in certain circumstances? So you don't only want to end with conducting an evaluation. It's kind of a starting point, and it can really contribute to the field if we are more open about it, if there's a better learning culture about it, and also if then indeed the capacity is increased on how to use that evidence and evaluative practices in the field.
So you're speaking already about utilization and the importance of utilizing the learning and the understanding from evaluation, preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization are vast fields, many, many different actors. You've got work being done by governments, by law enforcement agencies, by think tanks, by non-governmental organizations, and you're working to advance the practice of monitoring and evaluation within that field. Why is it important? What is it that doing better evaluation practice, that building a culture and a practice of evidence-based evaluation, what would be the value, what's the importance that that could bring to the field?
So there are many reasons why evaluation is important. And many of the reasons are also mentioned by Indeed and in all the amazing work that you have done. So some of the common reasons why we need to do M&E is for being able to say something meaningful about the work that we're doing. Has it actually worked, and how has it worked? It's not really about being right or wrong. It's about learning, and it's about deeper insights in the mechanics. I often see it as a social science project to do an evaluation. Like, okay, you have a society and there are many different moving pieces and mechanisms, but what does that, like, how can you change one tiny bit and then see what happens? So it's for me, it's about understanding societies and how all of the interventions that are happening have an impact on that. So it's about learning, and it's about being able to say something that can prove effectiveness, or that can show that you indeed have an impact with your work. That is not only important for basically how you view your work or how you view your organization or how you present your results, but also for accountability purposes to funders. And as funders, it's really important, I would say, that you know how your money was used, and for the public, how also taxpayer money is being used in this field. So that links to accountability and transparency. And also to do no harm. There are many different elements related to it. But I think for me personally, what I find very interesting about evaluations is that it can really empower people. It can bring new voices to basically the forefront of the practice that was done. So I think a lot of policymakers and decision makers, they come from a certain bubble, and it's quite hard to break out of that bubble. Obviously, a lot of things are being done to gain a lot of perspectives and to meet with many different people, but really, really deeply understanding someone's reality is really hard if you do not, if you're not from the same circumstances as they're from, if you don't have the same identity characteristics. There are many different things that shape someone's experience, and it's really hard to really understand what that is. So I believe that through facilitating an evaluation process, you can really learn from other people's experiences with the program. So the program was designed, but how was it received? And what was the impact for the people who it targeted? And how can you then bring those people to also talk about that, and how would they want to see that improved maybe in future iterations?
So it can be a tool that can help us to actually understand what the initiatives, the policies, the work we're doing is achieving, how and why, and how to engage to really be able to support that impact even more.
Yeah.
We're here in Madrid for one of the Indeed programs, and one of the things that we've been speaking about is, and you mentioned it now, building a culture of evaluation as well. And one of the colleagues in our program the other day mentioned that it's not only about building a culture of evaluation, we actually already do have a culture of evaluation in some ways, but sometimes it's a negative culture.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a culture where we see evaluation as something that's just imposed from above, it's a checkbox approach, or it's something that's only done by external consultants and experts at the end of a project. And you've written and spoken in other places about some of the assumptions around the evaluation field and some of the challenges in it. What do you see as some of the assumptions and the challenges that, if we're trying to really bring forward a good culture, a practice of evaluation, we need to address and to see how to perhaps overcome or work to change them?
Yeah, exactly. So I work together with Amy Jane Giele on a publication regarding these prevailing assumptions, we call them, in the field. So whenever both of us, we work as evaluators, whenever we bring up the word evaluation, there are a lot of maybe objections or assumptions that come to the forefront. Yes, yeah. Yes. And they are legit because they come from true underlying challenges that are related to evaluation. So what we did is we defined the assumption. So we defined 4 key assumptions that we've heard many times. Then we looked at what is the underlying challenge that is indeed one that needs to be addressed in the evaluation field. And then we look deeper, like what are good practices to overcome the challenges so it is possible to conduct M&E. So to dive deeper into it, the first challenge the first assumption is that M&E cannot be done because you cannot prevent or you cannot measure prevention. It's impossible to measure a non-event. So that is an assumption we've heard many times. And it comes from the challenge to basically uncover a causal link between a program and a very far impact statement. That's very hard. Like it's possible. But it is a challenge and it is hard, and you need to find ways to overcome that. So some of the good practices that are out there is to really dive into a theory of change. So if you know well the steps, and if you design your project well with specific outcomes and very measurable objectives, you can trace how each step of the way of your program leads to the result that you intend for it. And you may find out that actually your program works differently, but you can then measure how it works. So the aim is not to measure from your activity if from that activity no one radicalized. That is not what you want to, what you should want to measure. I think what you want to measure is, did this one intervention, this activity that I did it change people's perspectives? Did it change someone's attitude? Do they have the intention to take it away in their daily lives? And then if so, after a few months or years or a particular period of time, how did that change their behavior? And if it did, what did that lead to? So there are many small steps, and I think through theory of change you can really identify these steps, and then you know what specifically you want to measure, rather than going straight from an intervention to a non-event.
I wonder also, we've been speaking today specifically about the importance of your situation analysis and understanding the risk and the resilience factors and the factors that can contribute to creating the context and the conditions in which possibilities for someone becoming radicalized or for extremism might be higher. And I heard a parallel once years ago looking at evaluation from the point of view of the field of medicine, for example. How do you trace causal impact analysis? And the example that was given was looking at rates of cancer. And one of the things that we know when understanding cancer is we know that smoking can be a contributing factor that can increase the likelihood of cancer. It doesn't mean that everyone who smokes will get cancer. It doesn't mean that smoking is the only factor, but it is a factor which can increase risk or vulnerability to cancer. And you can look at and trace whether an initiative, it could be a public health campaign, it could be a early childhood or education intervention campaign, it could be additional taxes on cigarettes, it could be all different types of actual interventions, and you can see, has that intervention had an impact on people's attitudes about smoking, on the likelihood of people purchasing cigarettes, on how many cigarettes people smoke, and then you can also trace over time, if you're seeing reductions in smoking, are you seeing reductions in cancer rates? And you can actually draw the causal connections, and you can also, with building up the body of evidence, be able to learn what are the types of interventions which might actually reduce the likelihood of people smoking.
Exactly. And so it is possible to look at attribution, but I think indeed what has also been a challenge is that maybe people focus too much on attribution, and it's really helpful, especially for smaller projects or when you're starting with M&E, to focus on the contribution. So the aim is not to be the sole actor who affects change,
but to see in what way
exactly
is it contributing to change.
Exactly. So it's like about all these tiny mechanisms in the big social system that can together bring about this change. That's also why it's so important to move beyond looking only at the effect of one intervention, but at the cumulative effect of all of different interventions happening in a particular space.
I love that you mentioned that, because that's an area that I'm extremely passionate about. And you, when telling us about your origins and getting started in the field, spoke about a background in the peace-building field and conflict analysis. And in peace-building, we've brought forward the idea over the last decades of cumulative impact analysis. And you're looking at, when you understand the context, you understand the conflict or the context in which you're having violent extremism and radicalization, and you see that it's a problem with many dimensions. It's something that no one initiative or policy or intervention can address on its own. And cumulative impact analysis, we look at who is doing what at different levels, and how does that relate to the understanding of the issue, the problem that needs to be addressed, and then also being able to see what's missing, what's not being done, or what needs to be done better.
Exactly. I find it so interesting and intriguing that in prevention efforts, they always talk about the multi-agency approach. And yet, one actor thinks that their evaluation will show that they, with their intervention, have significantly reduced radicalization. which if you indeed embrace the multi-agency, multidisciplinary approach, you will understand that it's not that one agency that will reach that goal. It's all together that you will. So I would encourage agencies to really look at what is our expertise. Maybe our expertise is on youth, or our expertise is on law enforcement and making people feel safer in the streets. Then your evaluation will focus on that particular aspect rather than on the overall societal high level, we need to reduce violent extremism.
And the need maybe for both.
Yeah, exactly.
To look at the specific and at times to be able to look at how does it actually impact or contribute to impacting on that broader overall goal. And you mentioned collaboration, you mentioned multi-stakeholder engagement. That's also been one of the real orientations of the Indeed project, but also one of the orientations of what we have been learning from evidence over the years of practice in the field, that it's not enough to come at it just from a single agency perspective, but as we've been discussing today also in the program, law enforcement can bring a certain understanding, analysis, and skill set, the public health approach, social workers, education, and each of these has different lenses for understanding, but also different tools. By coming together, we can get a better understanding of what are the issues we need to address, but also really look at, are we doing it in the right way? Mm-hmm. What are the different parts of how we work on those? You spoke about the assumption in terms of around impact of the work and trying to trace that. Were there other assumptions that you mapped or other prevailing views about M&E that came up in the work that you did?
Yeah, another one that's very often mentioned is that the people don't have the time for M&E. And I can imagine, and it's a real challenge in our world, the time constraints and everything needs to happen fast and there are limited resources. But what has research and evidence has actually shown that it will save time if you engage in evidence-based practice and also in monitoring and evaluation. Because it means that you're actually recording and tracking what you're doing. So it will also be a lot easier, for instance, to look back at what has been done, to build upon that, but also in general to have information and to increase organizational capacity because you have that in place.
That's one of the conversations that I've always found to be so interesting and important for us to engage with in the field, because there is, you do hear often the argument of, well, it's going to cost money and we don't have time. At the same time, we're working on issues that are so big, that are affecting our society, that we're engaging with them over years and decades, and cumulatively we are spending millions, hundreds of millions, and even billions of euros on addressing these issues within our societies across the European Union, around the world. Now, if you're doing that and you're spending that money and what we're doing isn't working, mm-hmm. or what we're doing could be improved, evaluation is that tool that asks that question and helps us to find those answers of whether what we're doing is working or isn't working, or going even deeper, helping us to understand how and why. So exactly as you said, bringing forward evidence-based evaluation helps us to improve evidence-based policy and evidence-based practice, which actually is faster and cheaper than doing the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think a related challenge that also comes up a lot is that it's too sensitive to do evaluations for. And also, very interestingly, we have evidence in our research paper on this, that it, in many cases, actually publishing an evaluation report didn't receive a lot of heavy public backlash. So there are cases in which that happened, but there are also cases in which, specifically in the Dutch context, it was received and there was not a huge upheaval about it. So I think that it's a really interesting paradox, because this secrecy around much of the PCVE work actually creates this kind of tension on it. And then releasing something, or a lot of journalists might start digging because there's a secrecy around this topic and they want to know what's happening and they want to know where all the money is going. But if you're proactively transparent about what you're doing, the chances of very negative public backlash will also be smaller.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because it speaks to another one of the functions that evaluation can have, which is actually to strengthen accountability and transparency in a democratic society, because it's helping us to really explore and to be transparent about what's working, what isn't, and how we can improve. So evaluation as an instrument for also strengthening the democratic practice within our field.
Exactly, and hopefully by facilitating evaluations, you can then also bring back trust in public institutions. By engaging a large group of stakeholders, but also the target groups, the policymakers, facilitating that conversation between the different actors in society, and then being transparent about the results, I believe can have that function.
So at ICCT, you have been working to create the M&E Center of Excellence. And we're seeing actually more and more organizations across Europe that are taking up this effort to begin implementing monitoring and evaluation. You also have initiatives like in Germany with pre-val, trying to bring different actors together and strengthen multi-stakeholder collaboration to practice actual evaluation and share those learnings together. Do you have any advice for either practitioners that are looking at how to understand evaluation better, or organizations thinking about building this into their practice? How can people go about getting started in this work?
Well, first of all, it's indeed a fantastic development that more and more attention is given to evaluation and evidence-based practice. How I would suggest starting is by starting really small. Starting with small changes from the design phase onwards. So when you're planning and designing an initiative, sometimes it's hard to imagine what an evaluation could look like, or what to do, or you get overwhelmed with all of the potential data collection methods and approaches. So what I would encourage practitioners is to start really small by first thinking through the logic. What is exactly the thing, like pick a few key things that you really want to achieve, and then build that in, like going through all the steps that are outlined in many different helpful toolkits. But you don't necessarily need to immediately start doing 100 interviews to get a good assessment. You can do that like with a fully fledged evaluation. I would always encourage people to write that into a project at various stages that are helpful. But for people who are implementing the program, it's not necessarily part of your daily work to conduct that evaluation while you're at it. What is important is that you know what data you have to gather throughout your process, so then an evaluator can use that. But you don't need to come up with the entire evaluation design when you're thinking about your project. What is important though is thinking about the results and getting the baseline data. So what is the situation before the intervention, and then collecting data at crucial points in time that the evaluator can work with that.
So Aileen, you spoke about starting small, starting simple, and using steps that can help you in that. And I have to make the connection with what's been developed in Indeed, where we have the e-guidebook on how to design, develop, and implement evidence-based evaluation, and also the e-guidebook on how to design evidence-based initiatives. And these have led also to the creation, and you can find these on the platform, of the evidence-based evaluation model and the evidence-based evaluation tool, where organizations can actually have a step-by-step guide of what to go through, what to consider, what questions need to be asked when thinking through how to do an evaluation process. But also the other point that you mentioned, when designing initiatives, thinking about evaluation from the beginning and thinking about what's the information that we should be gathering as we do our work through monitoring, through creating a baseline that can help to have that data and information, which can then be used in an evaluation. Aileen, every time we speak, I feel that we could keep speaking for hours, and I hope we will. I have so much appreciation for the work that you and your colleagues at ICCT are doing and helping to contribute to making this field better and to bring forward evaluation within the field. If you've enjoyed the conversation that we've been having, I would also invite you to take a look at the publication that Aileen mentioned that was done together with her colleague Amy Jane Gielen.
Yes.
Gielen.
Gielen.
So, debunking prevailing assumptions about monitoring and evaluation for PCVE programs and policies. You can find this on the ICCT website. We'll also have it available in the links and the comments section for this video and on the resources section of the Indeed website. And we have the Introduction to Monitoring and Evaluation in the Counterterrorism and PCVE field. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and wishing you all the success in the continuing effort behind the Monitoring and Evaluation Center of Excellence.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.